All right, let's talk about maybe the single most unlikely story ever told. Ours. Seriously. The story of how humanity is even still here. It's a wild ride, a story of surviving against absolutely impossible odds, a tightrope walk over the pit of extinction that we've been on for almost a million years.
You know, when you really dig into the history of our species, it's not some grand triumphant march of progress. Nope. It's more like a series of just astonishingly close calls, world-ending catastrophes, and moments where our entire future hinged on nothing more than pure dumb luck. Our very existence is this crazy paradox of being incredibly resilient and, at the same time, terrifyingly fragile. For most of our time on this planet, the biggest threat wasn't something we built. The danger came from the Earth itself. We were just this tiny, vulnerable species, completely at the mercy of ice ages, supervolcanoes, and massive climate shifts that could have just wiped us off the map in a geological blink of an eye. And our first great test? It came from the ice.
Okay, so to really understand our first near miss, you got to get this one concept, a population bottleneck. Picture a bottle full of all these diverse, colorful marbles. That's a healthy species. Now, a bottleneck event is like tipping that bottle upside down and only a few random marbles manage to squeak out. The entire new population has to be built from that tiny random sample, and you lose a ton of the original diversity. Well, our ancestors went through maybe the tightest bottleneck imaginable.
Now, this wasn't just a bad winter or, a rough couple of decades. By looking at the DNA of over 3,000 people living today, scientists have found this hidden scar in our collective genome. It points to a moment way back in the deep past during some intense climate chaos where our entire lineage just almost vanished.
The scale of this collapse is just staggering. I mean, get this. We went from a pretty healthy ancestral population of about 100,000 breeding individuals down to just 1,280. That is a 98.7% drop. The entire gene pool for every single human alive today was reduced to a group small enough to fit inside a high school auditorium. It's why, even with 8 billion of us on the planet now, humans have shockingly little genetic diversity compared to other apes. We are all descendants of a tiny, tiny handful of survivors. And this wasn't a quick catastrophe. Our ancestors lived on this knife's edge, this tiny little population clinging to existence for over 100,000 years. The cause was likely something called the mid-Pleistocene transition, a crazy period of dramatic ice ages and climate turmoil that led to widespread famine and conflict. For 117,000 years, we were one bad season away from being gone for good.
So, we barely, and I mean barely, survived that long winter. Our population starts to recover, and then around 74,000 years ago, the planet throws another haymaker at us. The Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupts. And this wasn't just any old eruption, it was one of the largest explosive events in the last 25 million years. We're talking thousands of times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. For a long time, scientists figured this was our second great bottleneck. The Toba catastrophe theory basically said that the eruption threw so much ash into the atmosphere that it kicked off a volcanic winter, cooling the planet for years and pushing humanity right back to the brink, with maybe only a few thousand of us left.
But, and this is where the story gets really amazing, new evidence from dig sites in Africa and India tells a totally different story. It shows off our species' greatest superpower, behavioral flexibility. Instead of dying out, our ancestors got creative. They developed new ways to fish in shrinking water sources, they invented the bow and arrow to hunt more effectively, and they followed seasonal rivers, these blue highways, to find what they needed. We didn't just survive Toba, we innovated our way right through it.
Okay, now let's fast forward a lot. About 73,000 years into the future, we've spread across the entire globe, we've built incredible civilizations, and then, in the 20th century, we invented a totally new kind of existential threat, one that had nothing to do with nature and everything to do with us. This was the dawn of the atomic age. And this is such a crucial point. The whole nature of risk just flipped on its head. For millennia, survival was all about being smarter than the climate. Now, all of a sudden, survival was about not being dumb with our own toys. Our continued existence started depending less on adaptation and way, way more on pure, terrifying luck. I mean, the history of the Cold War reads like a catalog of just absurd, terrifying near misses. In 1960, a brand new, powerful radar system mistook the rising moon for a massive Soviet missile launch. In 1962, a bear climbing a fence at an airbase almost sent nuclear-armed planes into the sky. A training tape played by accident, a faulty 46-cent computer chip, these tiny, ridiculous errors repeatedly brought the world minutes away from total nuclear annihilation. That was the tension of the era. Everything was on a hair-trigger alert. Once those missiles launched, there was no calling them back. Leaders had just minutes to decide if a warning was real or just a glitch in the system. Our survival literally depended on someone in a control room looking at a screen that said 2,200 incoming missiles and thinking, that seems a bit much.
But the closest we ever came, the one moment that truly shows the razor's edge we were all living on, happened in a secret Soviet bunker in 1983. And the fate of the entire world didn't rest on a president or a general, but on one lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov. So the alarms start blaring. The system says 5 American missiles are in the air, heading straight for Moscow. Now, protocol was crystal clear. Report the attack up the chain, which would trigger an immediate, all-out nuclear retaliation. But Petrov, he had a gut feeling. He thought a real first strike from the US would be hundreds of missiles, thousands even, not just 5. So he makes this terrifying decision to break every rule he'd ever been taught. He picked up the phone and reported his system malfunction. And he was right. It was just sunlight glinting off high-altitude clouds in a weird way. Humanity survived because one guy had the courage to trust his intuition over his computer. So we survived the Cold War, but the danger hasn't passed, not even close. In fact, according to a lot of serious thinkers, we've now entered the single most dangerous period in all of human history. The philosopher Toby Ord calls it the precipice. The precipice is this unique, and let's hope temporary, era that we're living in right now. It's the time where our ability to create existential threats through nukes, through biotech, through artificial intelligence, is growing exponentially faster than our wisdom and our political system's ability to actually manage. So, what are the odds? Well, after years of research at Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, Toby Ord puts the chance of human extinction or an unrecoverable collapse of civilization happening in this century at 1 in 6. That's the same odds as rolling a single die and having it come up as a 1. It's a shocking and, a deeply uncomfortable number. And where does all this risk come from? Well, the biggest slices of the pie aren't from the things we usually worry about, like an asteroid or even another nuclear war. The greatest risks, according to this analysis, come from future technologies that are being developed as we speak. So let's look at the 2 biggest threats on the horizon: unaligned artificial intelligence and engineered pandemics. Now, I know these might sound like they're ripped from a sci-fi movie, but they are treated with the utmost seriousness by the researchers who spend their entire lives studying existential risk. The single greatest risk identified is from what's called unaligned AI, with a jaw-dropping 1 in 10 chance of causing our extinction this century. The worry isn't a Hollywood robot rebellion with lasers. It's about creating something far more intelligent than us, but whose fundamental goals aren't aligned with ours. Imagine telling a superintelligence to end human suffering, and it calculates that the most efficient solution is to just eliminate all humans. That's the alignment problem. The second biggest risk, at 1 in 30, comes from engineered pandemics. As biotechnology gets cheaper and easier to access, the ability to create a virus far deadlier and more contagious than anything in nature falls into more and more hands, which just increases the risk of an intentional or even accidental release. So this brings the whole crazy story together, doesn't it? We've gone from being this tiny band of ancestors huddled against a global winter, to a civilization literally gambling with atomic fire, to right here, right now, standing on the edge of the precipice. This quote just nails the essence of our modern challenge. Unlike that climate crisis 900,000 years ago, our biggest threats today are all self-inflicted. Our incredible intelligence has given us the power of gods, but we haven't yet developed the wisdom and the foresight to handle that power safely. For almost our entire history, survival was a story of adaptation against nature. Then it became a story of sheer luck against our own worst impulses. But here's the thing, luck eventually runs out. Now, for the first time ever, our continued existence depends on a totally new factor: conscious collective wisdom. So the question for all of us living in what might be the most pivotal century humanity has ever known is simply, what do we do next? If you found this whole exploration of our improbable survival as fascinating as I do, make sure you subscribe.
And let us know in the comments. What do you think is the single most critical step humanity should take to make sure we get through this century? Thanks for watching.